everyone. Welcome back to the Divergent Hope Podcast, where we explore many ways to experience God, to connect with God through Jesus Christ. We are so glad you're here joining us. Today, we're going to talk about obstacles to prayer. And I have with me two incredibly special guests, Christie Jaegle and Karen Cooprider. Karen, yes, was with us on our first podcast. And Christie and Karen, we have been soul companions, journeying together for how many years now, do you think?
Well, I don't know, 3 or 4?
4
years?
at least,
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been good.
It has.
We've gotten to know each other well.
Yes, we have. And we even were able to keep meeting through COVID.
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Yeah. So this is very special for, we're just going to have a discussion like we would when we were meeting together. We meet together once a month generally, and we really go deep in talking about our spiritual journeys together and how we're encountering God and what God might be saying to us, and just reflecting things back to one another. So it's been really good. And today we're going to talk about prayer and obstacles to prayer. So our first question, what for us personally are some of the biggest obstacles to and in prayer? And what are some of the ways that you have learned to work through those? I'm sure we all have had obstacles to prayer, unless maybe you haven't really prayed very much yet, and that's fine too. Hopefully we can learn from each other. Christie, do you have anything to talk about with that?
Well, I think if I were a millennial, I would have been diagnosed immediately, probably with ADD. And so that makes my mind very busy and going 100 different directions. And I tend to be a busy person anyway. And that really works against me because I have all things going. When I try to concentrate, it just goes out the wind. So I'll have great intentions and I'll start to pray, and all of a sudden I am deciding what new dog food I need to buy.
That's perfect. Makes me think of the movie, Squirrel. Yes, exactly. How about you, Karen? What kinds of obstacles have you encountered?
Well, the biggest one for me is certainly distractions or misplaced priorities, even, right? Where other things take precedence and squeeze out that space that I might otherwise give to God and sitting with Him. I know that a lot of times there's, even when you're trying to sit and pray, you can get pulled, in different. You can begin to think, gee, I've got all these other things. I've got to be here. I've got to be there, or whatever. Or I just think sitting with God can be hard. It's hard work because it goes against our grain in a culture where we're striving to do and be. Do a lot as opposed to just simply be, and so that's a struggle. Kind of interesting though, because I sat and chatted with some other folks about this before this, just to see what their thoughts were about this, and they had some ideas as well, things like that I thought probably might resonate with some of our viewers, but unbelief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, does this even matter? Is anything going to change if I sit with God in prayer? Is what I have to say important enough? Is it and that's sometimes the result of us making prayer so complicated for people, where they think they're not good enough, that somebody else is better because they're more eloquent or they're closer to God or something like that, right? And so sometimes we think, I don't want to bother God with the small stuff. I don't want to take up that space, or I need to go to the expert prayers, the people who can pray for us, or that kind of thing. But for me personally, it's definitely the distractions, even the arrogance maybe, or like feeling as though, especially when things are going pretty good, if something small comes up, I've got this. I don't need to go to God because I can I got this. I'll bring the big stuff. Let him handle the big stuff. I'll take care of this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's those kinds of things too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, I mean, you reference this, both of you, without using necessarily the word, but I think of noise, the noise in my head, the noise in my heart when I sit down or when I pray. That's just there because of all that's going on inside of me that maybe I haven't processed yet, or, I'm frustrated about a situation, whatever. That can be a huge obstacle to prayer, because even when I do take the time, then it's like I can't get past this, or it's like you're saying, Christie, it distracts you so much. Another thing, and I think you already said this, Karen, is shame. I don't know. I know you were talking. Okay, yeah, we were talking about it earlier. The idea that, especially if I know that I've done something wrong or hurt somebody, that shame then can keep me from wanting to turn to God. And I can receive self-condemnation. And so then that just keeps me from really wanting to open up to God. And that's a big one, I think, to keep us, in terms of obstacles. Another thing, though, strangely, on the other end, that can be an obstacle to prayer for me at times is not feeling like I have any words, anything to say. I think it's more when my soul might be a little more in repose. It's rare. But when I think, I just don't have words, God. I don't have anything to say. And I've learned slowly that's a good thing. That can be a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. That can be a time for, God and me to just sit and be and enjoy each other. Right. But again, I think in the ways that we often tend to think about prayer, of interceding or, needing to talk to God, if I don't feel like I have anything to say, then I think, is this really prayer? So it can become a type of obstacle if we let it, which is interesting.
Yeah. I think you're making me think of somebody was talking to me about silence as a form of prayer, and they were thinking that was, to them, sort of a cop-out or being lazy, because even Jesus said, here's how you should pray, and he gives us words.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel like we need to fill the space, just like when you're in a meeting and there's a lull, and somebody has to answer the question or somebody has to speak because nobody likes the silence. But there's something really sacred and holy about leaning into the silence and being okay with no words.
Yeah.
That I think we can learn from. It's not natural for us.
Right. I think of, years ago when I was thinking about my own marriage or our own marriage, and about what does it mean to be married to Christ. And I was thinking of how, in a marriage, and the same is true in a really good friendship, you can be completely comfortable being totally silent with each other. That's a sign of a good relationship, a comfortable, a deep relationship. No different than with God. So that's what started to really make me think differently about when I don't have words to say, but it can still be prayer with God. So, yeah.
That's good.
So when God seems to be asking you to wait in prayer, what are your emotions? And maybe right off the bat, you're saying, what do you mean when God is asking you to wait? So maybe a better way to talk about this is when you are praying for something that you really want, or you're passionate about, or you want for somebody else, and you stay at it for a while and nothing seems to be happening. What do you do with that, with God? How has that evolved for you over time, and what does that look like in your prayer life? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I know that I've certainly been there, and it can be very frustrating. You can. I mean, I've gotten mad at God, or don't you see the situation? And then you go back in your head and you know things that you've been taught, that sometimes God says it's not time. It's not, and maybe I'm going to answer it differently than what you are expecting, and you've got to look at it differently, or maybe the answer's no, or sometimes you've got to go back and say, okay, how can I frame this differently? How can I look at it differently, just to kind of cope and get through it? But for me, so what this made me think of is, and you guys know this because we've talked about it over the last 5 years. But for me, I used to work full time in ministry, and when I stepped out of that space, and God was inviting me to slow down. He was inviting me to be still, and because I'm an American and I have a lot of things I can do, and I still have. I'm fairly young. For me, I want to be doing something. Being is difficult. I want to be doing something, and I didn't have a title anymore, and I would sway this pendulum back and forth to, God, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? What do you want me to do? Should I start taking classes in this area because we're going to go in this direction? Should I go here? Should I go? And inevitably he would say, just chill, just chill. Or I would feel this sense of you're okay. We're not looking right now. We're not looking right now. We're just going to be. And so I would go between kind of an antsy frustration to a place of peace, and I could rest there for a while, but then I would start to amp back up and get over to the other side and back and forth. So for me, that's it was very helpful for me to have you guys and other friends that I could process these things with and talk to, because you could reflect back even maybe what God was trying to say and teach me in these times. I was able to begin to learn more about myself, learn more about how to sit with God, and be with him through various spiritual practices and things, which I'm sure you'll be talking more about in future podcasts. Yeah. I knew, because of the length of time that God was dragging this thing out, that I was a slow learner, and he wanted me to stay in this space and teach me things. So in the end, I don't know that I'm in the end. I'm still kind of in the process, but I'm learning a lot and growing a lot, and God's teaching me, and so I'm leaning into the waiting in a way that's refreshing for me. So
I don't think you're slow. I think and I think this is true for most of us. We, as you said earlier, we generally are good at doing. And we're practiced at that, but we're not practiced at the being. Right. And so it takes a long time to learn that. We've had our whole lives really to I'm getting that confused, but to practice the doing rather than the being.
Yeah. And in my case too, there's other lessons that God is throwing in there. Like in our culture, you meet somebody and they say, what do you do?
Exactly.
And when you don't have an answer to that question, you start to wonder, well, what value am I bringing to this world?
Right.
And so you're looking for, what is my purpose? What is in other people's eyes? Yeah. Even though I know that God, you're just saying, we're just going to do this together over here. Don't worry about what everyone else is asking you or expecting, that kind of thing. Exactly. So there's always deeper lessons and stuff.
Yeah, much deeper. I know.
Yeah, for me, it seems like, too, I was thinking it kind of depends on what God is holding off answering. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, if it has to do with my adult children, I immediately go to guilt. And which kind of piggybacks, because it's like, if I had only done this differently, or if I could do this, or if I could be in control. And that kind of leads me to one of the big things that's always been an obstacle to prayer, but it also really comes in when God's waiting. And because I don't wait very well, and it's like intense frustration. So again, like we've been talking with the doing, I've got to do something. And so it comes in that I've either got to control the situation or fix it, because God has I've given him his time limit of 3.5 days. Right. And so I will just take over where he obviously has left off.
Yeah.
And so that's what ends up happening. And then a myriad of problems occur.
Yeah.
So
I think, too, of either trying to control it, or there are times in the waiting that I get bored in prayer. And not just in waiting, but when I feel like I don't know what else to do here. I don't know what else to say. I'm kind of bored with this. And I think of how, what do you do with boredom with prayer? One of the things I have done is I try to move my body and pray. So take a walk and pray. Or I will go to the Psalms and I'll pray a psalm just because it will get me out of my boredom and thinking, more about God or about what the psalmist is saying. But even boredom can be, definitely can be an obstacle in prayer, because then it can make me just want to walk away instead of stay with God in it and actually say, God, what are you trying to teach me in the waiting? What do you want me to see about myself? Learn about myself? Or am I asking the right questions? Maybe there's another question that I should be asking, right? Someone said, that's really most of the battle is learning what are the right questions to ask. I don't mean the battle with God, but in life. And how asking the right questions is often a huge shift and change. So, yeah.
So many emotions come up. And I've found that journaling really helps me.
Yes.
And it helps focus my thoughts, and it helps me name my emotion. Because it can go from one direction to the other, depending on the day. And so if I will begin writing, it not only focuses me, but all of a sudden it's like I can begin to tell God what really is there. Not what I think He wants me to say or what I should say, not the right answer, but what's really there. And I've tried to practice over the last few years, not only naming that emotion, but just being able to settle into that feeling. And so if I'm angry, to be angry instead of, oh God, you wouldn't want me to be angry because I'm supposed to pretend you're in control, even though I don't feel like you're in control. And so just to do those, and how He begins to work on me within that. And I begin to be able to look at things like within the waiting. That's the thing, because so much comes up, and I believe lies so easily. And it's like I get fearful, He doesn't care about me. And so if I write them, I begin to say, oh, I'm believing that He has abandoned me. I believe that He doesn't have my best in mind. And then I can stop and say, but what do I really know about God? Or I can go back to the Word and find out the truth. And that just recenters me so that I can continue waiting on Him and believing that He will answer.
That's good.
So
That's
excellent. So excellent. Okay, so how can our personal issues of control, or some might say codependency, surface through prayer? How can they be obstacles to our connecting with God in prayer? So this is really a continuation of the waiting, but what might come up in the waiting, some of the things that come up, like you're talking about, Christie, in the waiting, that might point out our control issues, our codependency issues, and how they can be obstacles in our prayer with God. Christie, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, one of the things that I was thinking as we were talking about how we really, the obstacles to prayer have kind of been because we believed false things about prayer. And so we're having to relearn what God really says prayer is. And so as we begin to look at it and relearn. So in this case, for one of them, it's my perfectionist that's all involved with that codependency. And so I've looked around for years, and there's been these people that will meet 3 times a week at the church or at a home at 5 o'clock in the morning, yes. And they'll go through this formula of, adoration, confession, all good things. But that is what prayer has become to me. And so instead of it just saying, God, you created me in a way that I don't even want to do that, much less I just don't function like that. So if you created me like this, maybe that isn't what prayer is between you and I. Mm-hmm. And so changing that perfectionist stuff and being willing to say, hey, maybe what I believed all these years has been wrong.
Wow.
And starting new.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying, well, just because Karen does it, then I have to do it that way. But who was I created to have fellowship with you, God?
I love that because, again, you bring it back to what prayer is about, the intimacy with God, and you being who He created you to be with God, not having to mimic somebody else. That can certainly be helpful as we're growing up in prayer, as we learn how to pray. But that the formula doesn't have to be the way we do it all the time or what even works for us. That's so perfect. Christie, I think you had for those who might not really have a good sense of what the word codependency means, could you give a little definition around that? You mentioned the perfectionistic piece of it, and it is a big word. We're not going to dive into the whole meaning, but how else might you define codependency?
Well, codependency is a big word, and it comes out in different ways for different people. But basically, it is not knowing where my boundaries start and stop, both with God and with people and with situations. So I just don't know. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that, when we're out of control, what happens is that we want to take control and we want to fix things, or I have to be perfect because I can't be wrong, or I have to be a people pleaser, which goes along with this trying to do prayer like everybody else does, because I want them to think that I'm some spiritual giant until they get to know me very well.
That's excellent. So helpful, I think. And then again, it helps us to assess, is that what I'm trying to do with God? Am I trying to control God, or am I trying to control the situation in prayer? Even praying a certain way for somebody who's asked me to do that, and then waiting in prayer, sitting there thinking, God, why aren't you answering this?
And it means because I've done it wrong.
Exactly. And therefore you get into the whole codependency, perfectionist, controlling thing, when God might be saying, but I'm doing something else so much better. If you would let me, if you would wait on me. And getting back to the lies, do you trust that I really have your best interest, this person's best interest? I have a much higher, better way. Do you trust that? Can you let go? Can you believe in my sovereignty in this? You look like you're going to say something, Karen.
I'm just soaking in everything. I had not thought of the whole angle of looking at kind of what you guys have been talking about, this idea that there's a right way to do this, whatever this is, and we do this in Christianity all the time. Mm-hmm. There's a right way to pray. There's a right way to worship. There's a right way to make sure you're doing the right sacrament, or whatever it is, and so we fall into this trap of if we don't, what am I going to do? I remember one of our pastors once sharing a message where he was in this really dry spell, and he was was doing his, Monday he prays for this, and Tuesdays he prays for that, and he's got his lists, and he writes them down, and he prayed, but he was just dry, and he felt like God just wasn't there, and he wasn't responding, and he didn't have the passion anymore. What am I going to do? And he brought it all to the Lord, and he talked to his spiritual director about this, and the guy basically said, stop doing that. Mm-hmm. Just put it away and stop doing it. He's like, I can't do that. I'm the pastor, and I'm preparing sermons, and I have to pray. And I said, no, I want you to stop doing that and go for a walk in the woods.
Right.
And I want you to keep doing that
Yeah.
until you have some breakthrough. And he did.
Yeah.
And it was life-changing for him because he just needed to do it differently because really prayer isn't about a formula or going through motions. It's about
relationship.
With God. It's intimacy and relating to and conversing with God and enjoying him and him enjoying you. And so if what you're doing today is getting stale or not getting you excited, then do something different.
Right.
And enjoy God in a different way. And that to me is letting go of control. And I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, one of the things I love too is in just seeing in my life that God is like the ultimate multitasker. He'll multitask, and so a lot of times that's what he's doing while he's waiting to answer a prayer, or all of the things is he will just say, okay, I'm going to need to pause, just like he did in your pastor example, because I need some work done on you. This is the thing that we're going to work on now, and I've got the rest taken care of.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
You are not the center of the universe, but I am, and so we're going to do some work in a different direction.
I think, too, that center of the universe thing where I think often how God will impress on me, Laurel, have you ever thought about that maybe I'm actually doing something else in someone else's life that is going to be involved in the answer here, and I'm in the process with them and it's not time yet? It's not all about me. It's about what God might be doing with somebody else and their process, what they need to go through in their journey and come to before the prayer can be answered the way it needs to be. And so that was a big, oh man, I am so self-centered. It's all about, my timetable, what I think it needs to happen and when. So, yeah, interesting. So what do you do when you realize that you're being asked by God to surrender to God's will, but internally you feel very resistant? You don't feel ready. How do you handle that? What do you do in that situation? If God is really brought up to you in prayer that you're convicted, we use that word, that you need to lay something down. You need to die to yourself. You need to stop doing a certain thing. And it's become very clear to you. But internally, everything in you is rising up like, no, I'm not ready. I don't want to give that up. What do you do with that in prayer? Any thoughts?
Besides kick and scream and argue and cry.
Well, what do you do after that? Yeah. That's
you talked earlier about praying in the Psalms, and as I was considering this question, I was thinking about how so many of the Psalms start with kind of, God, what are you doing? And this is awful, and these people are mean, and da-da-da. And then the Psalm will begin to be, but you are God, and but you are good, and I want to praise you forever,
Yeah.
And there's a progression of taking the emotion to him, and then as you sit with him with that emotion, you begin to recognize again who he is, and that he's got your best interest in mind, and that he is good. And as you think about that, you begin to realize and surrender your junk to what he is wanting, and you turn in praise and thanksgiving to him. And I realized as I was writing that, I was like, oh, this is like an outline for a psalm, what I'm writing. It's in my notes here. But that was my it doesn't always go like that. And I know that over time, there's different areas where I've grown more. And I mean, I'm sure some people are sitting here listening and going, well, how do you sometimes know what God's will so that you can even surrender to it?
Right.
And so those recognizing and hearing his voice, if you will, or his intentions, or what he's asking you to let go of or move on from, is something that even I'm growing more in. I don't know how to give an answer to specifically how to do that, but I don't know. What do you think, Christie?
Well, one of the greatest truths that hopefully we learn as we get older and wiser is that our emotions follow. That we won't feel good about something immediately, that we may know the truth of something I have to do, like God asking me to do something, but not to depend on my emotions to be right there. But I love it, like you said, that God is not threatened a bit. He wants those emotions to come out and me to throw a fit. And then, just like our 2-year-olds, then we can say, oh, thank you for telling me how you're feeling. Are we ready to move on? And one of the things that I have come to appreciate in doing is to ask God for the willingness to make me want to do what He wants, but also feeling comfortable to let that take time. And I know, Laurel, you were the first one I heard this from, and I love it. It's the idea of sitting on a rock wall, a New England rock wall with God, and just talking it over with Him and being willing to talk it instead of, because our normal reaction is, if I don't like it, I'm going to stuff it and I'm going to go act out. And do whatever I want, and then no telling how long it's going to take me to come around to Him. So trying to stay with Him even when I'm not willing to do something. And so make that part of a growing relationship to Him. And so as I sit on that rock wall with Him, either asking the right questions like you had brought up, or just saying, I'm not there, but I want to be, because I want to be where you want me to be. And waiting.
Yeah. And waiting.
So again, if He can wait before answering a prayer, we can wait a little bit before surrendering. And that's a part of that relationship.
Yeah.
And He is certainly not in a hurry for us to come. He just wants our hearts.
And of course, He's not surprised at the resistance
at all.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the most profound stories of resistance in my life, of how God worked it through. And I know I've told you both this story before, but how my first pastorate, when I was offered the job, and I did not want the job. Internally, I did not want it at all. And I knew that. But I knew that God was saying, bring it to me. So I did, and I just poured out my heart and said, God, I don't want this job. I don't want anything about it, And I had done all my research around this particular church, and they know I've told them this story, so I'm not telling anything out of school. And so that next morning after they offered me the job, I had asked them for a week to pray through it. And I invited God into that resistance inside of me, just saying, come into it, transform it, do whatever you want if you want me to take this job. But the way I feel right now, I can't do this. But I want to give you opportunity, time to, change my heart and my feelings, if that's what needs to happen. And it was, looking back, it was kind of fun to watch how each day I'd kind of check in with the Lord and with those feelings and think, nothing's really different. And I was, again, meeting with different people, getting advice, getting input. By day 5, my heart had changed completely. It had done a 180. And it was through prayer, it was through scripture, it was through meeting with different people and talking with them. And no one person had this big aha, like, this is why you should take this job. It wasn't that. It was this slow movement in my heart. And watching God do it, I could not believe it. And knowing that it wasn't me. I wasn't, and nobody had said one thing that changed it all around. But to see God within 5 days even change my heart so much was like, wow, you can do that. So, and it's usually not that fast. That was a fun experience because it was that fast. But to know that God can do that and does do that for us. And yes, you're right, Christy. I mean, the feelings they do follow. But to know that when you're feeling so strongly against something, and then to have God turn that and make it, the opposite is pretty cool.
Yeah, and he's a master at that, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
And
he really
if
is.
we will just be in that with him.
Yes.
And that's just like you said, inviting him into that and not being fearful.
Right.
It's because you have to know God and begin to be willing to know God for that to happen.
Right. Yep. So finally, how might our fears be an obvious or underlying obstacle to our prayer? What role do fears play in obstacles?
You had said earlier that fear is probably the underlying thing in all of the obstacles,
right?
Somehow connected to everything. But I was thinking, for so many of us, there's so many things that prayer scares us. God is so big. Mm-hmm. We're not. He's good. We're not. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I want to get too close to him. Mm-hmm. That's a vulnerable place to be. I don't know if I want to, in the discovery process in prayer of my own self, I don't know that I want to see or learn things about myself, or change things about myself. Yeah. Or I'm not sure I want to hear what might be required of me if I'm talking to God. Or sometimes it hurts, right? Sometimes going deep or being emotional or crying out to God is tires us out. I think there's a lot of reasons. I'm not good enough. It's going to expose my guilt. You talked about shame earlier.
Right. Yep.
But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I was thinking of this question before, I was thinking of, which you've already mentioned, I have illusions about things, right? And God's really about changing my mind about those, saying, Laurel, why are you afraid? Why are you afraid of letting that go? And what are you trying to control, or what are you trying to make happen? Have you ever thought that maybe that's actually not good for you or not the best thing for you? And what if I haven't made you for that? What if I've made you for something else? And you're going to miss all the joy in that. So I feel like when I start to be willing to face the fear, then God expands my view, gives me a wider perspective of what I might be missing, or what I'm protecting myself from. I think I'm protecting myself from. What I'm really keeping myself from, something really good. I also think, it's all about wanting to stay in our comfort zone, Don't ask me to step out into something that looks really scary and increase my faith. Anyway, what about you, Christy? Any other thoughts on?
Well, I just think it's interesting because there's probably two sides of the coin right now, especially after COVID. Anxiety is running rampant.
Yeah.
And so anxiety caused fear about everything. But then on the other side, my ego can also tell me, you're not a fearful person. You're like this adventurous person. You can do anything. And so in both extremes, I think it takes a lot of work to sit down and say, what am I afraid of? What really does that look like? And be willing to dig down enough, again, where we come to the lies. What am I believing? What am I believing? And letting God into that. Am I really fearful? And a lot of times it's that I don't don't believe you've got my best.
Yes.
You know,
That's
you're
right.
going to do something for me that I don't want, and I'm scared to death.
Right.
And so when I'm willing to go that direction and look at it, all of a sudden my relationship with him begins to grow slowly and in trust. And it really has nothing to do about the thing that I was praying about. Mm-hmm. It's that bottom line thing about who I am and who my God wants to know me as,
right?
Who he wants me to be in relationship with him.
The vision that God has for us is always so much bigger and better than what we can imagine for ourselves, which is just really Paul's prayer in Ephesians 3, that God does do, but also wants to do so much more than we can ask or imagine, which gives me courage and kind of pours faith into me when I am feeling so fearful and so trapped by those lies. Well, this has been great, so lively as always. I love these discussions together, and I hope you all did too. Enjoy them, and we are going to continue having more conversations around prayer. We're going to look at in episode 4 and 5, we're going to be looking at creativity in prayer, and we're also going to be looking at communal prayer. So I hope you'll join us for those episodes. Thanks for joining us today.